The next transaction that we're going to evaluate is a B2C transaction, and one that we're probably all very familiar with as we've just hit about the year mark in the US, at least in terms of shutdowns and the amount of time we've spent on our computers on Amazon.com or similar platforms purchasing goods that many of which are shipped from abroad. So this transaction we're going to look at is again, one very familiar to us. It's the case where a non-resident company makes a sale of a tangible good to a consumer outside of their home country jurisdiction. And I think we're going to look at this both from an inbound and an outbound perspective. And, with the tangible property, imagine the sale of a pair of sunglasses, for example, is a good example of a tangible product. We're also going to throw one variable on that, in that we would like to, given the evolving nature and treatment of digital products, we briefly like each jurisdiction to discuss the tax treatment if there were no longer the sale of a tangible product, but instead a digital product, for example, a cell phone application or something similar to that effect.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, for those in Europe. So yes, let me give you a flavor of the European VAT treatment of these two types of transactions. And I'm going to start with your second example. So what if you sell an app that, you sell it, an app for a cell phone? So if a non-European company sells this kind of supply of an app, which is qualified for EU VAT purposes as a service, well, that supply, if it's made to someone, to a final consumer in the EU, that supply will be taxable in the EU, and more precisely, it will be taxable in the member state where the customer resides. Now, in the EU, there is never reverse charge in B2C situations. So a non-taxable person, a final consumer, will never be responsible to self-assess the VAT and pay it through a VAT return. So in this case, it will be the liability of the supplier to calculate the correct amount of VAT and to pay it to the Treasury, except in this very situation where an electronic platform is a marketplace for application is actually involved in the supply, then in this case, the marketplace becomes the deemed suppliers and becomes liable to pay the VAT. So concerning a payment declaration and payment, to simplify this process, in the European Union, we have the possibility of a single registration. So that means that there is the possibility for the non-resident company to register not in all the member states where you have clients, but to register in only one member state, that would be the member state of identification, and to declare and to pay all the VAT related to your supplies of electronic services through that single point of registration. And actually, your member state of identification is going to redistribute the VAT to the other member state based on the data that you put into the declaration. Now, you don't have to use this single point of registration that we call the MOS, the mini one-stop shop. But if you don't want to register to the MOS, then you are liable to register in each and every country where you have consumers. So now we can go to my next slide where we can have an example to illustrate this. So imagine me, Marie, I'm a Belgian resident. If I buy an app from a company which is USCO on this slide, and I buy the app through a marketplace for application. Now, because I'm a Belgian resident, there will be 21% VAT due on that supply. And because there is a marketplace involved, the liability to collect that money and to pay it to the Belgian Treasury will be on the marketplace. So there is no liability in this case on USCO, and so no obligation to register to the USCO. It will be the marketplace who will either make a local registration in Belgium or is going to use the MOS. My second example on the right side of the slide, imagine my colleague Barbara from Germany. She buys exactly the same app, but she doesn't go through a marketplace. She buys it directly on USCO website. Well, in that case, because she's a German resident, you're going to have a different rate of VAT applicable. And of course, the VAT will be due to the German Treasury. And in this case, because there's no marketplace, the US company has to register either a local registration in Germany or a registration through the MOS. Now, next slide. Yep.
quick question. There's a lot of small app developers out there. Are many finding themselves caught in example 2 because they simply don't realize that if they're going through iTunes that they wouldn't have the VAT collection and remittance responsibility? I guess are many companies getting caught in example 2 unknowingly, given the
So these rules, they've been applicable for quite some time, and there is like extensive guidance on these rules that is available, and there has been some communication campaigns also by the European Commission to really make them aware of their obligations. And actually, for what concerns electronic services supplied by non-EU suppliers, the MOS has existed since 2003. So it's been quite a long time. And this is what is relatively new is the fact that if a marketplace intervenes in the supply, then the marketplace is liable. And that only exists since 2015. And I guess it's a major relief for the direct, for the sellers, because then if they don't do the direct sale, if they go through a marketplace, they're not liable for the VAT. Now, at the same time, when we talk about a simplified collection system, this is really what it is. So it's fully electronic, and you have really like basic returns to do. It's quarterly returns. Now, on the other hand, you always have to submit a return, even if you do not have taxable supplies in a given taxable period. But nevertheless, I mean, it's a single point of registration in one EU member state. And with that single point of registration, you can really declare and pay the VAT that you owe in all the other member states. So I think it's a great tool that definitely got to be known by suppliers. But if we go to the next slide, I would like to draw your attention on the fact that these rules, so the MOS and the liability for the platform, do not apply to everything and every service that you can buy online. So it's definitely going to apply if I buy an app or if I buy anything similar that is really fully automatically generated. So if I download content, music, if I buy a software that I download, then it qualifies as an electronic service, and the rules that I just explained will apply. Now, if I book a hotel night in Barcelona and I pay it online, this is not an electronic service. So there will be no liability if I do that through a platform, and there will be, for the time being, no possibility to have a MOS registration to declare the VAT due that if I am a non-resident supplier. But the good news is that the MOS, which is at the moment only applicable for electronic services, will be applicable from 1st July to allow the payment of VAT on services by non-resident suppliers. Now, if we move to the next slide, let's have a look at the situation of goods. So if you have a supply, an e-commerce supply of goods to a consumer residing in the EU, this slide is a bit busy. I'm going to tell you why. This is because we're going to have new rules coming up from 1st July. So quickly on the current system, you may be aware that if you are selling goods to customers in the EU and the goods are being shipped from a non-EU country into the EU, you may be aware that there is an exemption of VAT if this is a low-value good, and that means below 22 euro. And you probably also aware, if this is your business, that in most of the situation, you don't have to register as a seller because the customs are going to take care of everything. They're going to take care of collecting the import VAT when it is due. Now, from 1st July, things are going to change. First of all, because the exemption of VAT on low-value goods will be rescinded. So any good sold and imported into the EU as a consequence of that sale to a European consumer will be subject to European VAT. There is no threshold on the sale, and there is no turnover threshold for the supplier either. So even small suppliers, it will be subject to VAT when it's being imported, shipped to the consumer in the EU. Then the collection is going to change as well, because the customs authorities are not going to take care of VAT collection on all these supplies. They will continue to take care of VAT collection if the supply is worth more, so intrinsic value is more than 150 euro, because there you also have the collection of customs duties. So then customs authorities take care of collecting the import VAT. But if it's below that amount, and that's very often the case in B2C e-commerce, then you have different possibilities. First possibilities is the possibility for the vendor, again, to register into the EU via a simplified collection system, which is very similar to the MOS. It's actually called the IOSS, so it's an import one-step scheme. It has a different name, but the functioning is the same. You register in one member state, you declare all the VAT due on your imports to final consumers in the EU through that single point of registration, and then the redistribution is organized by the member state of identification. So that is a first possibility. If you don't want to register to the IOSS, then it will be the transporter who will directly collect the VAT from the consumer. So the transporter can be a postal company or FedEx or express carrier, whatever. So this is kind of the plan B if the supplier is not willing to register. So let's quickly go to the next slide for an illustration of this, of the new rules. So this is my last example. This time it's my colleague Hannes from Austria, who's buying not sunglasses, but camera for the purpose of this example, a camera from a US company, and the camera is being shipped from the US or from any country but outside of the EU. And let's assume that the camera is not worth more than 150 euro. What happens? Hannes is resident in Austria, so Austrian VAT is due there. It's a direct sale from USCO to Hannes, and then USCO may decide to register to the IOSS in one country in the EU and will declare and pay the VAT. So when the supply is made to Hannes online, the USCO should charge a VAT included price because it should collect the VAT and pay it through this IOSS. Now, if USCO decides not to register, then it will charge a price not including VAT to Hannes because the postal operator will collect the VAT directly from Hannes. So this is like the plan B because, yes, they realize that not everybody's going to be willing to register to the IOSS, also taking into consideration that actually you need to have a tax representative to be allowed to register into the IOSS. Here also, if the sale is not a direct sale from USCO to Hannes, but if Hannes buys the camera on a marketplace like Amazon in this case, then Amazon becomes a deemed supplier. So Amazon becomes the supplier for VAT purposes. And Amazon has the same options than the supplier. So it may register to the IOSS, or it may decide not to register to the IOSS, but most platforms actually are apparently willing to register to the IOSS. But if they do not, then it will be the transporter taking care of the collection. Now, my last slide is the next one, and I'm going to be very brief because it's about outbound supply. So thus far, I explained inbound supplies of services and goods to European consumer. Here on outbound supplies, I have very little to say except that it will not be subject to EU VAT. So it's assumed that it will be taxable in the country of residence of the consumer, and so the EU is not going to tax that situation. So from a European perspective, that's what I wanted to share with you today.
Quick question for Marie. Marie, how can the German tax authority enforce its VAT law on a USCO regarding business-to-consumer transactions? Isn't the US company outside the reach of the German tax authority as to enforcement? And how does the customer collect on the BTC?
In the B2C sphere, this is exactly the reason why we have these new rules that render platforms liable, because we expect them to be trustworthy partners in the collection of the VAT. Because we know for sure that the suppliers, even though, I mean, some of them are just frauding and some others are not aware of the rules. And that's also, the reason of your previous comment on, maybe this company is not aware that they have to register to the MOS. And so to avoid that, or to let's say maximize the chances of compliance, this is why the platforms are relied on to collect the VAT. Now, and then maybe, of course, the platform may be also not established in the EU, and then you have the same problem. Well, first, there is a reputational aspect, so probably the platform is more likely to be compliant. Concerning international cooperation, we do in the EU have a clear cooperation agreement with Norway and now also with the UK in the context of the trade agreement. Otherwise, with other states, and this is particularly a problem, I say, if I think about the volume of B2C e-commerce, we don't have this kind of agreement with China, for example. And so if a Chinese business is not paying the VAT, not collecting the VAT, there is very little we can do. Now, we have OECD mutual assistant, like general tax agreement, not specific to VAT, but in practice, and we have some reports from the European Court of Auditors on that, in practice, it's barely used. So we know this is a big issue, and well, this is something we need to work on for the sake of our public finances, to try to reinforce. But probably using the platforms as collectors is part of the solution, even though it's definitely not a solution for them, and even though it has a huge impact on them. So we can also look at this from that perspective, and there would be a lot to say about the impact on platforms. But from a treasury perspective, it probably increases the chances of getting the VAT paid.
Understood.